think that the question that I get asked the most through this channel is from people wanting to know how what we're doing here on the farm actually ties in with the design work that I do in my studio. So what I wanted to do in this video is to show you around the farm a bit more and talk about the projects that we're working on, or what I call our everyday projects on the farm, and then explain how I think that links into the work that I do in my design studio, but also importantly how it helps me to feel more creative on an everyday basis and to live a more creative life. If you're new here, my name is Ben, and I've been an urban designer for the last 30 years. And about 18 months ago, my wife and I bought this farm, which is 50 acres in northern New South Wales in Australia. And since we bought it, we've been doing a whole bunch of different projects. We've been renovating the house that was on the property when we bought it. We're now starting to convert this shed space that I'm sitting in into my studio, and next door we're building what we're calling the workshop, which is a space to host events and to run classes based around making and growing and all of those sort of things that we're interested in. We've also been building out a whole heap of garden spaces, tiny houses, stairs, you name it, all these different things around the property. But I think for us, this space is just about creating somewhere where we can grow more food, we can make things with our hands, and just generally live a more creative life. I think I've always just been kind of one of those people that enjoy making things with their hands. I've always sort of made bits of furniture, tables and chairs and things like that as part of my everyday life. But I never really saw how that sort of making kind of hobby thing on the side tied in with the design work that I did for my career. Especially early on, I worked in larger architecture and landscape firms, and I think by virtue of the nature of the scale of the projects that I was working on, I never saw how they sort of linked back to those smaller sort of everyday projects I worked on at home. But over the last 10 to 15 years, I've actually seen more of a blurring of that. And what I wanted to do in this video is talk about how that process of making everyday objects as part of your everyday life can help you to be more creative, but how it can also help you to be more creative in the design work that you do and open up new opportunities with that as well. A few weeks ago, I was making something here which I think provides a really good illustration of the idea I'm trying to get across. Being in a cold area, we've always got lots of firewood lying around in piles, and we came up with the idea of doing something where we can stack that, make it look a bit neater and nicer, but also there's functional elements. We have snakes and bits and pieces, so getting it into some kind of ordered form is going to help with those things as well. So starting out, we ended up finding that we had some of the, we call it Rio rod, which goes in the concrete. We had some of that left over from another thing that we were making. So came up with the idea of trying to use that to create some kind of frame that the timber would sit in, and that would create the ends where we can then stack the timber into sort of walls around the property. Again, it's not going to win any architectural or design awards, but I always use those sort of things as an opportunity to create these little sort of design projects for myself. And it just becomes an opportunity to learn new skills, to better understand how things go together, and just work with problems and materials and things like that that I've never really used before. It opens up sort of, it's a way to learn new things and to find new ideas. And I'm now finding that going through that process, those different ideas end up stimulating things that I do within my design studio as well. I think that's a particularly important point or process too for people just starting out as designers or creative people. especially if you're working for someone else in a design firm or something, rather than just seeing your creativity being limited to the projects that you do there, doing these little everyday projects on the side as part of your everyday life gives you the opportunity just to go through that creative process and to also be more maybe experimental than you would be when you're working on projects for someone else. But just going through that process of learning new things and just working your way through the problems is just a great way to get your creativity going and to learn new creative skills. The second really important way that I think that making things with your hands or having these everyday sort of projects that you do as part of your everyday life can help you to be more creative is that it can open up new opportunities or things that you hadn't previously thought that you would do as part of your normal design studio or projects. And for me, actually, I'll show you an example of a project I did a couple of years ago that I think illustrates the point. So I've found some photos here to show you, but I might actually go over here so that I can sort of show you top down. So I've got some photos of this project that I want to talk about, but I've also thrown some images on the iPad, which I think will probably end up showing it more clearly. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this project was it gives a good example of that link between the everyday projects and the inspiration you can get from that and the design sort of creative work that I was doing as work. The starting point for this project was I was approached by a council to help them to do some signage for their local area. So that's sort of gateway signage you see when you come into towns, the thanks for visiting and come again and the name of the town on the front. Interestingly, that had been normally approached by the two posts and the sign across there and it's sort of a ye olde looking font. But the brief was to try to create something that went beyond that actually said something about the local area and that the community would actually get behind and feel that it reflected something about the place that it was going into. But the brief also had in there that the budget was really quite limited or was based upon the typical signage. At the same time, on my farm, I was doing a lot of sort of those everyday projects where I was building fencing and doing a lot of things, walls and bits and pieces. And the thinking and the making and the process and the way of doing things from that really became important in terms of the design process for what I did on this particular project. I remember when I received the brief driving back home and looking through the landscape and thinking, how can we incorporate something that says something about the local area? And I kept coming back to the farm fencing that I was doing at that stage on our own farm, and that you saw everywhere within the landscape, those gateways into the farms. So the process or what I did to start off with is to think about how can we take those different elements that you saw in the landscape, the farm posts, the stone walls, the concrete, the core 10 steel, those sorts of elements, but go beyond that and actually incorporate into the design a way of doing things that reflected the local area. And the farm fencing was the key to that. The way that the posts were used, the trenches were dug, and all of those sorts of things went in for the end strainers and bits and pieces became a real inspiration, and the hands-on knowledge that I was getting through what I was doing on the farm became really important in this. Those elements were used in different ways and tied together to create different sorts of signage, and it created a palette of materials that could be used in different ways. But most importantly, the way of doing things and how those pieces could go together and what I was learning on the farm helped to make this a much more affordable approach. So rather than having sort of fancy detailing, we could keep that simple and the local manufacturers could do things in affordable ways. So We used a local mill to provide the farm posts. The core 10 steel was done by, again, a local fabricator, but the real design thought, and I think the success of the project, came out of how those elements went together and the problem solving and the sort of smart way of actually using the old way of doing things to create this new sort of form. It was a really interesting project, and that link between what I was doing on the farm and those everyday projects and the design, this was the first project where it became really clear to me. The other really interesting thing is that I wouldn't typically at that stage have done this type of project, but I think it was the confidence or the knowledge that I was getting through what I was doing with the hands-on projects at the farm that gave me, I think, the knowledge or the confidence to go forward with the project and to push it and to try different things. Once we had done the original sign, those ideas were then adapted to other projects where we had a lake, a park, different things like that. And we took the elements and we arranged them into different ways and created something that sort of became halfway between signage, interpretive and artwork, and really opened up a whole bunch of different opportunities in regard to the design and landscape and integrating it within there. So obviously this is just one example, but interestingly, as I've gone on from here, that link between the everyday projects that I do as part of my everyday life and what I do in my design studio has become stronger, and the number of projects and opportunities that have then come along on the back of that has increased as well over time, which then has sort of inspired me to do more of those sort of practical hands-on projects here on the farm as well. So hopefully the ideas that I've shared here and the examples I've shown give you some inspiration. But the key takeaway that I'm trying to get across is just, for me, that importance of those little everyday creative projects and the hands-on making as part of building your creativity, and how that can then tie back into whatever design or creative work you actually do. For me, it's just such a great way to build sort of new skills and thinking, and it can just open up opportunities that you may not have ever thought of before. It's something that's just increasingly becoming important for me, and the way that I'm setting up my studio is to have more of those sort of hands-on maker spaces, and that's what the workshop next door is going to be as well. So I'll share more of that in future videos, so if that sounds interesting, you can follow along. But yeah, thanks for watching, really appreciate it, and yeah, look forward to seeing you in the next one.